Mercedes' crushingly dominant start to F1 2026 has completely baffled its rivals, and even its customer teams are shocked by what the Mercedes works team can exploit from its engine. Most people had Mercedes pegged as a pre-season favourite, but few expected it to be fastest in qualifying in Melbourne by almost 8/10ths, the kind of margin it enjoyed during its most dominant turbo hybrid years. Charles Leclerc put up a valiant fight in the race, but realistically without a supreme start that allowed him to yo-yo with George Russell for the lead, he wouldn't have been in the picture. Ferrari does seem genuinely closer over a race distance, but Mercedes looks to have plenty in hand, even when Ferrari doesn't give it a dodgy strategy gift like it did in Melbourne. And Mercedes' edge over a single lap looks particularly stark, so much so Leclerc believed the data Russell's lap in final practice produced was a mistake because it was so impressive. And it's not just Ferrari that's baffled either. Last year's Australian Grand Prix victor Lando Norris finished almost 52 seconds adrift of the winner this year. McLaren looks firmly 4th best in 2026, given Max Verstappen's Red Bull finished on the back of Norris despite starting 20th. There are clearly chassis deficiencies with the McLaren, as it is lacking through the corners, but the most eye-catching data comparison is on the straights, as we'll show you later in this video. It's why McLaren admits it is a little puzzled about why it was so much slower on the straights than engine supplier Mercedes, and its sizable deficit to Mercedes might just have exposed a harsh new reality for customer teams in F1. In 2024 and 2025, McLaren proved he can still win Formula 1 titles by buying an engine off somebody else. It mastered the key factors of downforce levels, ride control, and tyre temperature management, but the game's changed in 2026. What McLaren team boss Andrea Stella calls the new language of F1 is the energy management and the new for 2026 power units. But it's not simply about who has the most powerful engine, it's about how it's used, where and how energy is harvested, and where and how it is deployed. And knowledge really is power in 2026. Melbourne was a rude awakening for Mercedes' rivals and particularly its customer teams, as it revealed just how superior Mercedes' knowledge is. The Works Mercedes team is at a level far beyond where its customer teams have got to. Alpine isn't a great reference given it's just switched to Mercedes power after 10 years of using Works Renault engines. Plus it had problems which, by its own admission, it can't blame Mercedes for. But long-time Mercedes customers McLaren and Williams are a handy reference. McLaren feels it's on the back foot for the very first time since it returned to Mercedes customer status in 2021, and having looked at the GPS data of qualifying laps in Melbourne, Williams boss James Vowles admitted his team had been caught off guard by what Mercedes had unleashed. It might have far bigger problems to work through, like an overweight car, but Vowles believes Williams is losing 3/10ths to Mercedes on the understanding of its engine alone. It's nothing to do with Mercedes keeping back a better spec of its engine for itself either. Don't forget F1 rules mandate parity of equipment between supplier and customer. The rulebook also lays down that software settings have to be identical too, and that all power units must be operated in the same way, run with identical software for PU control, and be capable of being operated in precisely the same way. But even though the hardware and software are the same, that doesn't mean these 2026 engines are run the same, and knowledge of what to input is king. So much of the energy management game is won and lost in preparation. Works teams are inherently better at being prepared in this formula if they're the ones who built the engine. McLaren is going out on track, running the car, and then it can react to what it has looking from the data. In Stella's words, that's not how you work in Formula 1. In contrast, Mercedes has much clearer expectations of the data it will gather before it even heads out on track, so it already has ideas of what to change and expectations to measure its data against. That's making it difficult for the customers to even predict car behaviour, because it's so closely linked to the energy harvesting and deployment. Vowles claims that there isn't an open door of information from Mercedes on how to get the most out of the power unit either. That doesn't mean Mercedes is deliberately blocking the best information to hold back its customers, but equally it is not handing everything to what are ultimately competitors on track. And why on earth would it do that anyway, especially to a McLaren team that Mercedes has finally knocked off the top of F1's pecking order after years of it showing it up. As the likes of McLaren and Williams found when they dug into the data in Melbourne, the sensitivities in play are like nothing F1 has ever experienced before. For example, having a battery charged at 100% going into turn 6 at Albert Park, rather than 99% or 98%, may seem to be a tiny difference from the outside, but that extra 2% of deployment could be worth tenths of a second on the following run to turn 9. Just look at how the faster McLaren on Saturday, Oscar Piastri, compared to poleman Russell in Q3. You can see Russell's able to stay on the throttle for longer on the run into the turn 6 right-hander, recovering energy while on full throttle, i.e. super clipping. Russell is then able to unleash that extra power on the run to the turn 9-10 sweepers, gaining around 4 tenths through that full throttle section. There's a similar pattern out of turn 10 too, towards the turn 11 right-hander. It means from turns 8 to 11, Piastri is losing 6 tenths, and it accounts for 73% of Piastri's ultimate time loss to Russell. That's an insane difference between two drivers with the same power unit in such a short space of time, in a straight line, but it's indicative of the knowledge advantage Mercedes has. In qualifying, the works Mercedes engine was also gaining well over half a second on the Ferrari and Red Bull in that section too, so Mercedes is absolutely killing everyone right now on energy deployment. It's also important to note that hitting that exact 100% battery charge level is tough too. Go over the peak and you risk a D-rate and you'll lose speed. Plus you have to nail not only the corner sequence just before so the systems are perfectly calibrated, but also the turns half a lap prior. Get your lift and coast calculation wrong on the entry to turn 1 and there is a ripple effect that can leave you losing the battery 5 meters earlier on a straight later around the lap. Even a singular wild moment which forces a driver to lift off can be enough to switch your MG UK from deployment to harvesting for a split second and throw an entire lap's calculations out at the window. If you want to understand more about how F1 2026 really works, make sure you're signed up to the Race Members Club, where you can get exclusive podcasts and videos. Right now you can claim 90% off your first month, just head to the link in the description. Norris says McLaren is nowhere near where we need to be with this car, and we've got to improve that. Mercedes is gaining massively from its superior energy management, but it's not like it's got a dud of a chassis. In fact, Russell believes the car Mercedes has built has been overlooked because there's been so much focus on the legality of its engine over the winter. Mercedes' deployment superiority is so enormous right now that it's hard to quantify how good its chassis is, but it is clearly strong. This year's development race will be even more intense than ever, and there's plenty of room for big swings in the pecking order, even if it looks like Mercedes has a clear edge right now. McLaren has a development plan in place to try and improve its car, but it's going to take a few races before it can bring major aero upgrades. That means its focus is on making gains with its harvesting and deployment tactics. To do that, McLaren knows that there is no other option than to sit down with its designated Mercedes engineers and try to understand things better. Stella believes there's low-hanging fruit in that regard that McLaren can cash in, but it's also prompted McLaren to wonder whether some gains are beyond the reach of the customer teams. Stella pondered whether there may be some other factors more systemic that not necessarily a customer team can control. If those factors prove to be meaningful performance differentiators, then that would be very bad news for McLaren, having proved that being a customer team was no barrier to winning championships previously.